The last week before Jesus' kangaroo court crucifixion and death they're full of events. And last time we looked at the triumphal entry, the parade, impromptu parade. It's hard to imagine in our world here, if you live in America, I don't know of any impromptu parades. Well, I suppose it's possible, but for most of us, where I live, several things would keep that from happening. I think probably the number one thing is everybody's all busy. And I mean, they're doing their thing, and they don't, parade down the street is probably not even going to get anybody's attention, but not so in Jesus' day. So the triumphal entry, he goes into the temple. He's made furious by the the money changers and the livestock salespeople, and his words were, "You have turned this house of prayer into a den of robbers." Kicks him out. Has another confrontation with the Pharisees, and then he goes back to Bethany, spends the night. Well, the next morning, we're in Matthew chapter 21, verse 18. Early in the morning, as he went on his way back to the city, he was hungry. Seeing a fig tree by the road, he went up to it and found nothing on it except leaves. Now, fig trees are not uncommon in and around Jerusalem. So it would have been a fairly natural thing, I think, to find figs on a tree and have a figgy breakfast. But the tree had no figs on it. And listen to what Jesus said. "May you never bear fruit again." And immediately the tree withered. Ooh. Did Jesus wake up on the wrong side of the bed? I have no doubt that Jesus was agitated. He had told his disciples what was ahead, and it kind of bounced off of them. He knew, and if you knew what he knew about your next 5 days, what would you do? What would your mental state be? Okay, now for me, I'm looking at Jesus, and I know Matthew never says, and Jesus was in a state of agitation. Never says it, but as I look at it, that's what it looks like to me. And here's why that I find a little comfort in that. I get agitated. I have to be careful that I get agitated about the right things, because often I don't. I just get, verse 20. When the disciples saw this, the fig tree immediately withered. They were amazed. Really? How did the fig tree wither so quickly, they asked. Legitimate question. Jesus replied in verse 21, "I'll tell you the truth. If you have faith and do not doubt, not only can you do what was done to the fig tree, but also you can say to this mountain, 'Go throw yourself into the sea,' and it'll be done." If you believe, you will receive whatever you ask for in prayer. Wow. All right, as a disciple, I see the fig tree, boom, it went from green to withered. You've seen a withered tree. There's nothing green about a withered tree. It's obvious. It's dead. Okay. And Jesus says, you'll you can do what I did to the fig tree and more. Okay, now when Jesus says you can say to this mountain, go throw yourself into the sea, and it will do it, that's not literal. There are no that we know of, and I think we would know of them, and they would have been written about. There was never an instance where a follower of Jesus said to a physical mountain, go jump in the ocean, and it did it. That's not. So what was hyperbole? To move a mountain in Jesus' day was more or less a physical impossibility. It would have been done scoop by scoop if it could be done at all. The Egyptians built mountains and the pyramids, but they didn't really. Nobody just said to a mountain, go jump in the sea. And it happened. It just didn't. But for the apostles, what could seem more impossible than that a mountain would move into the sea? Short of a devastating earthquake, that just is not going to happen. And Jesus says, well, yeah, that can happen. The most impossible thing you can think of can become possible because you prayed for it. I'm going to return to a theme that has been kind of coming out at me as I've gone through the Gospels. I told you this year my quiet time project is to read the Gospels over and over and over again. I'm in my 9th time through, and one of the things that has jumped out at me is the promises that Jesus made to his apostles, the 12 disciples, like this one. There's a principle there for us, but I don't think this promise is there for us. This is not a universal promise. It's a promise directly to the apostles. He goes on and says, if you believe, you will receive whatever you ask for in prayer. I've heard, I don't know how many, lots of teachings and messages preached and sermons about, if you believe, you will receive. Well, that was true of the apostles. Is it true of you? Everything you've asked for and you believed, you got. Raise your hand if that's happened. I haven't seen any hands up. I know I'm kind of in a mood today, so that's kind of tart, but here's the deal. God is able to do anything, but he's not under obligation to do everything that I ask for. Apparently, Jesus committed to the apostles that if they believed, they would receive whatever they asked for. Now let's think about that. This is not just some, when Jesus says, if you believe, the kind of belief that he's talking about there, that's not just, oh man, I believe I'm going to receive. Well, it's involved, but what do you believe in? What is the object of our belief? It's got to be the provider, not the provision. I fall often into a trap, I think, of sorts. It's human that I'm asking for things in a season where I've been asking for what felt impossible. I find myself having to go back and pull myself back to faith in the provider, not the provision. I don't know why, but that seemed like an important thing to share. Maybe you needed to hear that. I know I did. Verse 23, Jesus entered the temple courts, and while he was teaching, pause. Interesting tradition at the temple was pretty much anybody, if they could draw a crowd, could teach. You didn't go reserve a room. You didn't need any, if we could stand in the temple, we would realize, due to its construction, you didn't need a PA system. Lots of hard surfaces and sound would travel. But you could, even I could have stood in the temple and began teaching. And if a crowd accumulated, well, they could listen. So it wasn't like this was not some kind of new thing or exceptional event. I mean, this was happening all over the temple. Now, bear in mind, not in the holy place, and certainly not in the Holy of Holies, because only the high priest could go there, and only once a year. But he was teaching in the temple courts. The chief priests and the elders of the people came to him. Yeah, but boy, these guys, to me, are the epitome of pomposity. By what authority are you doing these things? And who gave you this authority? Jesus replied, I'll ask you one question. If you answer me, I will tell you by what authority I'm doing these things. John's baptism, where did it come from? Was it from heaven or from men? This was a gnarly question for the Pharisees and the elders and the chief priests, because they really didn't want to say it was from heaven. But because if they say, well, keep reading, they discussed it among themselves and said, if we say from heaven, he will ask, then why didn't you believe him? But if we say from men, we're afraid of the people, for they all hold that John was a prophet. I mean, they were damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? If we say it was from heaven, then the logical, subsequent question is, why didn't you believe? Because they didn't. And if we say it was from men, these people, they're observing our interchange here, and they could do us serious harm. And so, in verse 27, they answered Jesus, we don't know. What a chicken's way out. Choose a side. Then Jesus said, neither will I tell you by what authority I'm doing these things. It's every time the chief priests and the scribes and the elders and the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the ruling class in Israel, every time they came after Jesus with some kind of a dig or accusation or some crafty way to catch him, he just turns the table. I would think eventually, and what happens is, they eventually realize we're going to have to resort to other tricks, other dirty tricks. And they do. And we'll talk about them as we move through from here. But for now, I'm done. I'll see you next time on So Care with Stevie Boy.